Hello everyone. Today we explore the relationship between the media and the public. We learn the difference between an active and passive audience. We will consider Stuart Hall and some communications models. Audience is a very important concept throughout media studies. All media are made with an audience in mind. When we say audience, we would think of a group of people who will receive it and make some sort of sense out of it. Therefore, it is important to understand what happens when an audience meets a media text. When media is being planned, perhaps the most important question the producers consider is, does it have an audience? If the answer to this is no, then there is no point in going any further. If no one is going to watch, read, play, buy the text, the producers aren't going to make any money or get their messages across. Audience research is a major part of any media company's work. They use questionnaires, focus groups, and comparisons to existing media texts and spend a great deal of time and money finding out if there is anyone out there who might be interested in their idea. So that means that we would be so limited if we do not examine the audience. Not studying the audience is only half the battle. Studying the media in isolation is lacking a crucial dynamic in this relationship. All media is about people, not just the creators, but also those who receive these creations. But why should we study audience? There are several reasons. First, because we are the audience, this may seem obvious, but we forget that we are constantly bombarded by media. Second, because we need to understand not only what the media is doing, but how we react to it. When we study audience, we find out what interests them, who influences them, what problems they have, what they think of existing media, or how they feel about the messages communicated to them. Audience understanding research helps media communicate with their audience and integrate their views and opinions into their media messages to be able to get the message across. Audience is not the public as a whole. The public is now segmented according to multitude of factors. First, the type of media, but also things such as location and where people are experiencing it. Being an audience is in itself a performance. That puts a responsibility on us as audience because audience's reaction shapes future media messages. So, if we watch a movie, our reaction to the movie will be different depending on if we watch it at home by ourselves or on the big screen with friends. Or if we attend a rock concert, we may just be there for the spectacle. However, a classical music concert may be appreciated for the performance itself. There is also the notion of audience competence. As we engage, we develop knowledge of various medias and learn how best to react to it. A part of understanding an audience's relation to media relies on deciding if an audience is active or passive in their reception. An active audience participates more readily in media. They engage, interpret, and respond in different ways and is capable of challenging the ideas with the content and consider its influence. A passive audience simply sits back and lets the media dictate the message. They accept the messages communicated to them without challenge and are therefore more likely to be directly affected by the messages. As with most theories, there have been a variety of different models and theories regarding the media. The most of that being simply sender message receiver. Of course, we know this model to be too simple for our needs and incredibly inefficient. American sociologist and psychologist Harold Laswell is best known for his linear model of communication that he developed in 1948. The Laswell model of communication describes who is saying something, which channel is used to convey the message, and who the message is aimed at and what effect the message has. Communication sciences and public relations still often use this model, making this a classical sender-receiver model. The model describes a one-way process within communication. The model consists of five components: who says what, in which channel, to whom, with what effect. The answers to these questions provide insight into the communication between people. Who is the communicator, also called the sender, who formulates, spreads a message? The sender can also be intermediary. What is the content of the message or the message that the sender spreads? Which channel? The channel describes the medium or media that is used to convey and spread the message. The medium can consist of several communication tools, mass media, and social media. To whom? This describes the receivers, such as a target group or an individual with mass communication. There is the different kinds of audience. Which effect? The effect is the result the message leads to. The so-called triangle of success: knowledge, attitude, behavior is often used to describe the desired effect. The Shannon-Weaver model of communication is a mathematical theory of communication that argues that human communication can be broken down into 6 key concepts: sender, encoder, channel, noise, decoder, and receiver. It is a linear model of communication that provides a framework for analyzing how messages are sent and received. It is best known for its ability to explain how messages can be mixed up and misinterpreted in the process between sending and receiving the message. The model starts with the sender or the information source. They are the person or object or thing, any information source who has the information to begin with. The information source starts the process by choosing a message to send, someone to send the message to, and a channel through which to send the message. A sender can send a message in multiple different ways. It may be orally, through spoken word, in writing, through body language, music, etc. An example of a sender might be the person reading a newscast on the nightly news. They will choose what to say and how to say it before the newscast begins. The next step in Shannon-Weaver model is the encoder. The encoder is the machine or person that converts the idea into signals that can be sent from the sender to the receiver. The Shannon-Weaver model was designed originally to explain communication through means such as telephone and computers, which encode our words using codes like binary digits or radio waves. However, the encoder can also be a person that turns an idea into spoken words, written words, or sign language to communicate an idea to someone. The encoder might be a telephone, which converts our voice into binary ones and zeros to be sent down to the telephone lines, the channel. Another encode might be a radio station, which converts voice into waves to be sent via radio to someone. The next step in the model is the channel. The channel of communication is the infrastructure that gets information from the sender and transmitter through to the decoder and receiver. We sometimes also call this the medium. A person sending an email is using the World Wide Web, internet, as a medium. A person talking on a landline phone is using cables and electrical wires as their channel. If we're face to face, perhaps we don't have a channel except the sound waves from our voice that carry the sound from the sender's mouth to the receiver's ear. The next step in the Shannon-Weaver model is noise. Noise interrupts a message while it's on the way from the sender to the receiver. It's named after the idea that noise could interrupt our understanding of a message. There are 2 types of noise, internal and external. Internal noise happens when a sender makes a mistake encoding a message or a receiver makes a mistake decoding the message. Here is the 2 points where it can happen. Either at the point of encoding, for example, when you misspell a word in a text message, or at the point of decoding, for example, when someone misinterprets a sentence when reading an email. External noise happens when something external, not in the control of a sender or receiver, impedes the message. So external noise happens at the point of transmission through the channel. For example, when we're having a conversation by a busy highway and the receiver is having trouble hearing over the sound of cars. One of the key goals for people who use this theory is to identify the causes of noise and try to minimize them to improve the quality of the message. The next step is the decoder. Decoding is the exact opposite of encoding. Shannon Weaver made this model in reference to communication that happens through devices like telephones. So in this model, there's usually a need for a device that decodes a message from binary digits or waves back into a format that can be understood by the receiver. If we're talking about direct communication between people without the use of technology, there may still be a need for decoding. For example, you might need to decode a secret message, turn written words into something that makes sense in your mind by reading them out loud, or you may need to interpret or decode the meaning behind a picture that was sent to you. Decoders can include computers that turn binary packets of ones and zeros into pixels on a screen, that make words, a telephone that turns signals such as digits or waves back into sounds, and cell phones that also turn bits of data into readable and listenable messages. The final step in the Shannon-Weaver model is the receiver. The receiver is the endpoint of the original Shannon and Weaver model of the technical communication process. This is the step where the person finally gets the message or what's left of it after accounting for noise. Examples of a receiver might be the person on the other end of a telephone, the person reading an email you send them, an automated payment system online that has received credit card details for payment, etc. Laswell, Shannon, and Weaver are not the only media effects theoreticians. Stuart Hall was a Jamaican-born cultural theorist who lived from February 1932 to February 2014. He developed some incredibly important theories about audience reception. His work on cultural theory resulted in massive change regarding audience theory. His theory managed to expand culture studies to include things such as race and gender, as well as politicizing audience reception. Hal spoke about how messages were encoded and decoded through a variety of culture discourse. The media creates a message which is encoded with discourse and sends it to an audience which decodes it. However, the audience may be operating on a different discursive culture ideological framework than that of the original encoder, and thus the message is not always decoded as intended. According to Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding model, both the producer and the audience have very specific roles within this model. Producers, people who create a form of media that is based on their ideas or ideologies, are known as the encoders, and the audience, viewers of the media that is produced, are known as the decoders. In the process of encoding a message, the sender may use either verbal or nonverbal symbols to help the receiver better comprehend the message. As the message is in the position of the receiver, the audience takes and observes the message into an interpretation and translation process where the coded information is decoded and translated into an understandable form. This process allows the opportunity for the receiver to reconstruct the idea by giving meanings to symbols and to interpret the message as a whole. However, the receiver won't always get the response the producer was expecting. In fact, there are three ways a receiver can decode a message, such as dominated, negotiated, and opposition. There is something comforting in this, knowing that we can decode the message our own way. This alone is why Hall's model is in support of a more active audience, because the audience's meaning structure is different from that of the producer. There can often be breaks in meaning, and it is in these breaks where autonomy is formed. In his words, the lack of fit between the codes has a great deal to do with the structural differences of relation and position between broadcaster and audiences, but also has something to do with the asymmetry between codes of source and receiver at the moment of transformation into and out of discursive form. What are called distortions or misunderstandings arise precisely from the lack of equivalence between the two sides in the communicative exchange. Once again, this defines the relative autonomy but determinateness of the entry and exit of the message in its discursive moments. Let's try simplifying encoding. The institutional structures of broadcasting, with their practices and networks of production, their organized relations and technical infrastructures, are required to produce a program. But they draw topics, treatments, agendas, events, personal images of the audience, definitions of the situations, form other sources and other discursive formations within the wider sociocultural and political structure of which they are a differentiated part, meaningful discourse. At a certain point, however, the broadcasting structure must yield encoding messages in the form of a meaningful discourse. The institution's societal relations of production must pass under the discursive rules of language for its product to be realized. Remember that reality exists outside language, but it is constantly mediated by and through language, and what we can know and say has to be produced in and through discourse. If we think of decoding, we will see that it is this set of decoded meanings which have an effect, influence, entertain, instruct, or persuade with very complex perceptual, cognitive, emotional, ideological, or behavioral consequences. In a determinate moment, the structure employs a code and yields a message. What are called distortions or misunderstandings arise precisely from the lack of equivalence between the two sides in the communicative exchange. Once again, this defines the relative autonomy, but determinates of the entry and exit of the message in its discursive moments. Hal seems to be arguing that messages cannot have intended meanings because the audience creates their own meaning. However, Hal warns us against the monopoly of the mass media. While he's confident that we can decipher messages ourselves, he's also cautious. He understands the power of the media industry and the limits of our ability to decode. He maintains that an audience should remain critical in their engagement with all media. Please watch other related videos and resources for this week. See you in class.